Number 115 is titled Olympia, and this is by Edouard Manet, not to be confused with Monet. We have Claude Monet and Edouard Manet. So Manet is going to be a border artist between realism, a bridge artist, and he's going to bridge us into Impressionism. This is 1863, oil on canvas. So Olympia is a really controversial, or was a really controversial painting because of this artistic tradition, right? So we're going to talk about these two ideas. What is the tradition he's continuing here? And then how in his painting is he breaking away from this tradition? Also, artists that have also worked in this tradition of depicting the reclining female nude, we haven't talked about these two. So these are both artists from Spain. These are both Spanish artists. On the left, you have Velázquez, Diego Velázquez, who made the painting Las Meninas. But he's titling this a Venus. I believe it's called the Rokeby Venus, right? So it's still veiled in that cloak of mythology. So it's okay to look at her body because she is a goddess, right? Goya, who's really inspired by Velázquez, painted this one on the right, and this is not veiled by mythology. This is just something erotic. This is a naked woman showing her body. So he actually did get in trouble for this. He got called to the Spanish Inquisition for this, but he also claimed that he's just continuing this tradition, just like Velázquez, and everybody loved Velázquez's paintings. So he was not executed and everything was okay. He did not go to jail for painting that. He did have to paint her again, though, clothed. So there's another version of it. All right, artistic traditions. What is tradition that is being continued here, right? So there's this long tradition of female reclining nudes that is being represented in a sensual way. We've seen it with Georgion. Georgion is the one down here, right? And this one inspired Titian. And then this inspired Ong. And then all of these have inspired Manet. All right, but in the past, they've been clothed by mythology, right? We've seen this in the Venus of Urbino and the exoticism in Ong's La Grande Odalisque. He is painting someone from very far away with all these exotic fabrics and objects. Therefore, it is this idea of this exoticism, something very far away, not just a woman from the street. All right, also this tradition is going back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, to this modest Venus, right, where she's covering her body, but also bringing attention to her body at the same time. And this is inspired by Titian's Venus of Urbino. So Manet is appropriating the composition and the subject matter from Titian's Venus of Urbino. It's almost the exact same, but we're going to talk about the breaking away from tradition, right? How is he changing it? All right, so Manet's controversial portrait of Olympia did not use a classical theme as context for the nudity. He is not trying to hide the fact that this is a prostitute. She is a sex worker. The name Olympia means a sex worker. So there's no veil of mythology, right? Prostitutes are for sexual pleasure. He's just putting it out there. The iconography used throughout the composition transforms the representation of the idea of this goddess of a Venus to Olympia, a sex worker. So we're going to talk about the iconography. And really, this bold statement here, this is the claim. Okay, so iconography used throughout the composition transforms the representation of the Venus to Olympia. So everything below is the specific visual evidence that is backing up that claim. So some ideas to think about, you have in Venus of Urbino, you have that sleeping dog, right? And we talked about the dog representing fidelity, being loyal. Well, in Manet's, we can't see it. So it's on the right of her foot. So here's a close-up of it, right? What do we have instead of the dog? We have a cat. The cat is aware of your presence, the viewer's presence, or whoever she's looking at, right? The cat is also making eye contact. It almost seems agitated, kind of like the dog from The Swing, right? That dog is agitated. The dog is aware. This cat has its back arched up. So the fidelity of a dog is changed to a cat, which is a symbol of lust and brothels. The domestic setting, what's happening in the background, has also changed to a brothel. There's flowers that are being held by a maid, and the assumption that these flowers are gifted from a client and she's not interested in them, right? She's not like, oh, look at these flowers someone brought me. No, there's none of that warm caringness. She really doesn't care. And the white attendant that we have in the background, right, with the child from Venus of Urbino, this represents motherhood. So the white attendant is now being changed to a Black servant, representing that interracial society. But the Black servant is also being put right up against this Black background. So it's almost kind of hard to see her. And there's that idea of the help is to be seen, but not seen, right? We don't talk to the help. There's that concept there. All right, more specific evidence. Manet's Olympia was a modern woman with frank, realistic features. She's also been described as more girlish than woman, which also, is a little more disturbing and controversial. Not an idealized woman. She's been described as having asymmetrical facial features, very cold and uninviting stare, very unapproachable as compared to the warmth that's being portrayed in Titian's Venus of Urbino. Her hand is kind of closed tight, right? Her hand is covering her body. She is the one in control. All right, so the painting style that Manet is using is really going against the academic tradition. He is not modeling her body with the chiaroscuro that Titian is using in the Venus of Urbino. You don't see that soft curving of the form. It's really just flat, it's pale, it's cold, cramped composition. There's no perspective. You don't have the space going back like we see in Venus of Urbino. Very choppy, short brushstrokes, flatly painted with no dimension. There's no modeling in the flesh. That's the chiaroscuro. The hand is really the only thing, right? The hand that's coming out towards you, that's drawing attention to her sexuality. So those fingers, I would describe her hand as being foreshortened. It's where you're drawing or painting something that's coming straight out at you. So a quote by Manet, creating provocative artwork is like diving into a river and just seeing what happens. He has another really controversial painting of a nude woman sitting in the grass. I believe it's called Luncheon on the Grass with clothed men. So this really horrified critics and viewers because it depicted a prostitute in a bold and confrontational manner rather than a secretive and demure individual. So she is shameless and defiant in her role as a prostitute. Again, this is really seen as shocking at the time. Here's a sketch that he made before creating the painting. And here's a quote, another quote someone said about the maid. So Olympia's maid, like all other peripheral Negroes, is a robot conveniently made to disappear into that background drapery. While the confrontational gaze of Olympia is often referenced as the pinnacle of defiance toward patriarchy, the oppositional gaze of Olympia's maid is ignored. She is a part of the background with little to no attention given to the critical role of her presence. Okay, I'm going to read through this. This is from the College Board. So we're going to take excerpts from this to add to our notes. So he is appropriating, right? To appropriate means to make one's own. We've talked about appropriation before with Fragonard's Rococo painting, The Swing, and then we have Yinka Shinobari appropriating it. We didn't talk about it, but Goya has this amazing etching, Sleep Produces Monsters, I believe. And again, we have Yinka Shinobari appropriating this. So artists and architects have practiced appropriation since antiquity. It is common for artists to look to previous works as inspiration for, and sometimes as models for their own work. However, appropriation is not simply an act of copying. It implies a self-conscious borrowing of pre-existing motifs, forms, or other elements, and a translation or transformation of these elements for the artist's own needs. Both Titian and Manet appropriated their images of women from earlier painterly traditions to create unique works during their careers. Titian's painting appropriated Georgian's Sleeping Venus and placed her within a domestic setting with iconographic allusions to marriage, right? We talked about what is alluding to marriage. The flowers, the dog, the cassoni in the background that would hold, I believe it was a wedding gift. And then you have the servant and the child alluding to motherhood. And then Manet, in turn, appropriated Titian's Venus of Urbino and placed her within a contemporary 19th century setting of a prostitute's boudoir or a brothel. All right. In his appropriation, Manet subverts, and that word means undermines the power and the authority. So he is subverting traditional painting to create a contemporary dialogue about everyday life in Paris. Manet had access to Titian's painting, which hung in the Louvre. He made copies of it in anticipation of his own painting. So he's studying, right, that painting. Manet used the basic composition of Titian's painting, yet transformed his representation of Venus to Olympia through the elimination of all references to the woman's role as a bride in exchange for references to her role as a prostitute. For example, Manet eliminated the cassone in the background of Titian's painting, that's that chest that she's in here, and replaced the sleeping dog with a cat with an arched back, a French play on words for female genitalia. The flower petals no longer serve as an iconographical attribute of Venus when they are placed in Olympia's hair and held in the hands of a servant, presumably a gift from a male client. Manet's replacement of the white attendants with a black servant enhanced the modern, unconventional nature of the work and contributed to its scandalous reception. He also changed the position of the reclining woman's hand. This hand refuses the entry of the viewer's gaze. The woman controls who has access to her body. Indeed, the name given to Manet's subject, Olympia, was not truly a classical name, rather it had become a nickname for prostitutes in the 19th century. Okay, so some important parts here that I would include in your notes. I believe we've already talked about them, but if you don't have these bits in your notes, I would include that. Beyond the individual objects substituted by Manet in his painting, the work is painted in a different style from Titian's. This is particularly evident in the artistic handling of the female nude and in Manet's movement away from the older, more idealizing conventions of its representation, such as the visual aspects of body language, the distinction between nudity and nakedness, the confrontational orientation toward the spectator, and the elimination of mythology in favor of realism. Instead of Titian's atmospheric approach to space and the use of soft, feathery brushstrokes to evoke the sensuality of Venus's flesh, Manet emphasizes the flatness of the pictorial space and eliminates the modeling of the figure. He painted with distinct brushstrokes and juxtaposed colors, including dark contour lines around the body, right? You can really see that outline form. Manet's rejection of the rules of decorum on form and subject matter as established by old masters caused an uproar for certain 19th century art critics. Yet because of this rejection, many critics now consider Manet to be the father of modernism. So we've got a couple fathers of modernism. So we've also talked about Turner being referred to as the father of modern art because of his art almost becoming abstract. It's more about color and space than it is about depicting an actual scene. All right, next we're going to have Impressionism, and Manet again is a bridge artist to Impressionism. So when I have you guys watch this video, it's going to talk about Manet, right? And then compare it to Monet and then Marie Cassatt. So as far as Manet being realism or Impressionism, here's some characteristics. So realist characteristics, he's barely modeling the figures. There's no chiaroscuro. If you think about the Stonebreakers, kind of similar in the color palette, pale skin juxtaposed with darker muted colors. And then comparing that to Impressionism, his subjects relate to the bourgeois. Manet began to associate with Impressionists, but he never exhibited in those shows. So he's not officially part of the Impressionism group. Boom, done.